All right, we're going to go ahead and get into our last set of notes for this unit. This is going to be notes number 7, factors that affect populations. Again, you can do the handwritten option. I have pictures included here. It's a little bit shorter than yesterday's set of notes having to do with animal adaptations, and there's no really drawings or anything today, but you can also print the notes that I attached to the pod. Either way would be fine. Just make sure you have something to take notes with. Okay, if you're setting up your notes by hand, here's how you're going to do it. Just make sure again that you have the title up here in the top left, factors that affect populations. We're going to have notes number 7 in the top corner. Have your divider line here. Our first topic is going to be what is a population, and then we'll start taking notes on the right side of that line. All right, so what is a population? By definition, a population is all of the organisms of the same species that live in the same place at the same time. We have mentioned this before, I want to say in the vocab, but also in a previous unit, I want to say. But population has to do with the number of one species of animal that live in a certain place in a certain time. So in this picture of butterflies here, we can say that the population of butterflies is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 butterflies in that one picture. Now, the reason why that's a population of 11 butterflies, I should say monarch butterflies, is because they're all that's the same species all living in the same place at the same time. Over here in this picture, we have a certain population of bats. Obviously, I'm not going to take time to count all of those. That would take me a very long time. But the population has to do with how many bats are living in that cave at that time. Even cities will have population counts. Population of Louisville in 2020 is probably different than the population of Louisville in 2019. All having to do with one species, whether that be humans, butterflies, bats, mammals, insects, arthropods, fish, whatever it is, living in the same place at the same time. So if you're doing your handwritten notes on the right side of that divider line, you're going to do the details. Remember, on the left is the subject, right is the details. So first thing you're going to do is write the term population. I put a box around it just so that I know it's a vocab word. And the definition there, all of the organisms of the same species that live in the same place at the same time. If you're doing the handwritten notes, I highly recommend pausing the video so that you can get the notes written down and then go on when you're finished. So, how does a population thrive? For any population to thrive, meaning to live and to live well, there must be enough of a few different things. These factors that are absolutely necessary for organisms to survive in that area are called limiting factors or limited factors, meaning whether these things are present or not limits the number of that species that can live in that habitat or in that place. There are a couple more than just the 3 mentioned here, but these are 3 of them: food, water, and living space. Okay, they're called limiting factors because they limit how many organisms can live in an environment. If there's only a certain amount of food available, there will only be a certain amount of animals that can live there and get enough to eat. If there's only a certain amount of water available, same situation and living space as well. This picture, by the way, is super cool. These are giant Australian cuttlefish. Really kind of colorful looking, kind of clear. I don't know, kind of scary looking too, to be honest, but still really pretty. So, first limiting factor, food. What limits how many of that organism can live in one place? The first one we're going to look at is food. Plants obviously make their own food. The word for that was autotrophic, like we said before. Just going to write auto here. But all other organisms, aside from plants, obtain food by either eating plants, called an herbivore, or by eating other organisms, called a carnivore or an omnivore. There's only so much food available in an ecosystem. Okay, so if there's a huge number of koalas, like in this picture here, or panda bear? I can't remember which one this is. Yeah, probably panda bear. But if there's a certain number, if there's a huge number of panda bears living in a certain, you know, 300 square miles or so, the more panda bears you have living in that area, the less amount of food there will be, right? Because each panda bear has to have enough food to eat. However, if you have the same 300 square miles and only have 2 panda bears, there's obviously going to be enough food for both of them to survive. This picture right here with the hyena, which we know is a scavenger, that reminds me a lot of The Lion King, the Disney movie The Lion King, because in that story, one of the big problems they were having is there was a famine in the land. The lions couldn't eat, so therefore the hyenas couldn't eat their leftovers, and that was a big problem. There were too many animals and not enough food, which limited the number of animals that could live in that area. The lions wanted to move on, the hyenas didn't. That was just part of the story there. And then this is just a picture of a barracuda, kind of a vicious looking fish. Okay. Next limiting factor is water. This is especially true of marine animals such as the Japanese spider crab, which you see up here. The cells and tissues of all animals, whether they're water animals or not, are made up mostly of water. All living things need water, not only just to make up their cells, but to move materials around in their bodies. In order for population to thrive, there must be enough water for all of the organisms. Okay, water is absolutely essential for all living things, animals and people alike, not only because hydration obviously helps keep our cells healthy, but it also helps move things and kind of flush our system out. Okay, so if there's not enough water in an area, that will affect the number of organisms of different species that live there. The next limiting factor, which we don't typically think about, but is super important, is light. Okay, and this is why. Obviously, light is important for plant growth, right? We know that plants cannot grow in a dark closet or in a dark room. Even if they have plenty of oxygen and water, if they don't have sunlight, they will not be able to perform photosynthesis, which is the process they use to make their food. So, if the light is limited, the growth of plants may be limited. And for many animals, if plants are not growing, that means there's a lack of food for them. It also means a potential lack of oxygen in extreme cases. Okay, we know that with the CO2 O2 cycle, the plants take in the waste from animals and humans and they release O2 or oxygen back into the environment. Okay, so if the plants aren't growing and there's nothing to kind of fill this link and cycle that carbon dioxide out for new oxygen, then after a long period of time, that will limit the supply of oxygen. But the bigger issue, what would become a problem faster, is animals that are herbivores, such as the panda bear mentioned in the slide before, will not have enough food to survive. So they're going to die off, and then obviously the whole food chain is affected when animals begin to die. So a lack of light leads to a lack of plant growth, which leads to a lack of food for some species of animals. The last limiting factor is living space. This becomes extremely obvious when talking about territorial animals like tigers, lions, bears, things like that. But even such as monkeys, they have to have a space to live. Toucans as well, really any animal, they have to have enough room for them to have their environment. Different species need more area for their territory. Obviously, bigger cats need a bigger territory than, say, a small cat or kitten. But either way, organisms need room to live, to obtain resources, and to reproduce. Okay, and the place where that animal lives is called its habitat. We mentioned that before in the vocab as well. But if there's not enough living space for the animal to have their habitat, they will not be able to live there. And the population will either die off, move to a different area, or have serious consequences. Now, this picture is kind of interesting with the lion, tiger, and bear all living in the same area because typically you would not find these 3 animals living in the same environment. That's not typical of those animals. But these 3 were actually, if I'm remembering the story correctly, they were adopted as cubs or rescued as cubs, and they were kept in the same environment, like kind of grew up in the same pen together. Now, if you had put these 3 together at this adult stage in the wild, they would have obviously killed each other or hurt each other pretty badly. But because they grew up together, since they've been cubs, they have always shared the same environment. They've been able to maintain the same living space, even though typically they shouldn't be able to do that. But kind of a cool scenario there. I can't remember what zoo this is at, where these guys are, but it was in an article somewhere that I read, so that was kind of cool. So if you're taking the handwritten notes, here's the cutoff point for what you should have already had. Everything below that is what you need to add. Let me just encourage you that there is a lot of writing even on the printed off notes, so just go ahead and pause the video, get these written down. But what do populations need? There's 4 limiting factors. Food, obviously there's only so much food available. Water, which is necessary for cells and moving materials through bodies. Light, which is absolutely essential to plant growth, and then which in turn affects animals that need to eat the plants. And then living space, important for having enough oxygen to breathe, and then obviously territorial space as well. So, if there are only a limited number of habitats available on a planet, especially as mankind continues to kind of expand and take up more and more space, one way that organisms can make this work and reduce the competition for food in one environment and even other resources besides food is to occupy a specific role in what's called a niche. Okay, not a niche, a niche. Okay, almost like that CH is an SH sound. But what is a niche? A niche is the special role an organism plays in an environment. Okay, a way I kind of think about this is almost like a team. Okay, um, on any kind of team, whether it be a sports team or a dance team or a chess team or any kind of team, every player occupies a specific role. And the only way the whole team works is as if everyone does their own job. Okay, the same is true in habitats with animals. There are different species that share a habitat. Okay, obviously, if you just look at the forest, for example, there's birds and ants and spiders and bees, butterflies, deer, even sometimes bears, all kinds of species that live in that same habitat together. But no 2 organisms can have exactly the same niche or special job. And here's what I mean by that. For example, let's say we have a forest where there are deer, rabbits, and squirrels all living together in the same leafy forest. However, if they all begin to eat the same food, they're going to fight over who has the food and who doesn't, right? Someone's going to get left out. So, what they do, or how they're made, deer browse higher up on the trees. Okay, you can see that in the first picture here. Their job is to reach up and eat the leaves off the bushes and trees. Now, will they eat the grass as well? Probably. Are they going to eat other things as well? Probably. But if the point is, if the rabbits and squirrels eat everything else, they aren't tall enough to reach the leaves on top of the tree. So if there's nothing left, the deer still at least has the leaves because nobody else has eaten it. Okay, that's their specific niche in this ecosystem. Rabbits, however, they're going to graze on the grasses. Okay, that's what they can reach, that's what they eat, not a big deal. And then, oh, here, that's the rabbits. And then the squirrels will feed on the acorns. Okay, so all 3 of these are available in that same habitat. The leaves high up on the trees, the grass on the ground, and the acorns from the trees. But no 2 animals are living off of that same food, off that same role. Okay, each one is able to occupy a specific job on the team, so to speak, and therefore they're all able to live in the same environment. So these are all different niches. If you're taking the handwritten notes, I had to go on to page 2, which you can see here, but here's everything you need to write down for niche and specific roles. Okay? Super, super important, super cool when you think about it. The way these organisms have adapted to be able to live in the same environment, or really just how they've been made to fit into the same environment. Okay, last part here, changes in ecosystems. There are a couple things that can cause changes within an ecosystem. Sometimes they're bad changes, sometimes they're good changes, it just depends. And these changes can be caused by 2 things. either nature or humans. Okay, nature and humans can cause changes in ecosystems. Examples of this are oil spills. Okay, you can see in this picture here, that kind of murky looking water or like the colorful water, that's actually oil floating through the ocean. Many years ago, there was a big oil spill. I can't remember the year exactly that it was, but there was a big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Killed a lot of plants and animals living along the coast there. Caused a lot of problems within the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem. There were a lot of dead animals being washed up on the shores of Florida and Louisiana, even down into Mexico and in the Bahamas. That was a big problem. Invasive species, okay, species that are introduced into the environment when you have either weeds that come in and kind of infest an area and take over, something like that. Overpopulation of grazers, which you can see in this picture here, which I'll get into more details in just a minute, and even building highways can cause changes to the ecosystem. And like I said, these can be either harmful or beneficial to an ecosystem. Okay, here you can see kind of the difference in, this is January of 2012. I want to say this was before the BP oil spill, and then this one was after the BP oil spill in Gulf of Mexico. I can't remember, but either way, you can see there was changes in the coastal line there, or even just the island altogether. I would click on that link, but because I'm recording this, it won't let me do that. Okay, so what effects can these cause in an ecosystem? Well, an oil spill could kill animals in all parts of the food chain. Okay, specifically, it would affect marine animals. So let's say it kills, all the fish in the area. Well, all of the birds, or let's say the pelican or seagulls, that kind of feed off the fish in that area. If all the fish are dying, then the pelicans don't have things to eat, therefore they're going to die. Well, then all of the bobcats that live in the area that attack the pelicans and they eat them, they're going to die because there's no more pelicans. Like it's a constant chain effect because they're all linked together. Okay, could kill animals in all parts of the food chain. And also, honestly, just kind of dirties the water. I remember back in the BP oil spill when I was living in Florida, there was a lot of talk about the effects on not only the marine animals there, but just the water and kind of how they were doing a lot of rescues, even just cleaning off birds so that they would be able to fly again. Their wings were all gunked up with oil, and it was kind of gross. Let's see, changes that forest fires can cause. This is kind of obvious, but obviously if there's an uncontrollable forest fire, this can kill animals, but it can also have some good effects. It can remove plants and dead or decaying plants that are kind of building up on the forest floor. This should say thins, not things. Thins out the foliage, meaning there's less leaves, there's less of a kind of cover or canopy. Enables new seedlings to get sunlight because that thins out the trees and allows more sunlight to filter through, and even can restore the soil composition. Okay, all those can be positive effects of forest fires. And that's what this bullet point down here is. There are some good effects sometimes. I will say back when I was playing softball in high school, forest fires are a pretty common issue in Florida, especially in the spring because we don't get a whole lot of rain in the spring. And I remember I was on the varsity softball team and we were going to the state tournament, and they actually had to postpone the games for a few days because the air was so thick with smoke from the forest fires that the FDA actually deemed it unhealthy for us to be playing outside. So that was kind of interesting at the time, but it could be another negative effect of forest fires for sure. Okay, here's some pictures of forest fires. This one up here is pictures of the oil spill again, just kind of the muck running through the water there. And then forest fires. Forest fires can be caused naturally, but can also be caused by irresponsible campers or hikers or kind of just a buildup of trash. And then someone, dropping a cigarette butt or something and can really explode and cause a real problem. But they can also just happen just because of nature. If an area has been really dry for a long time, sometimes a lightning strike can spark the fire. Could be lots of things, but they are pretty dangerous and they spread very quickly, which is why they're so detrimental sometimes. Okay, and let's see, now we have overpopulation of grazers. This means there's a let's say a grazer is a type of animal that comes in and kind of grazes on the grass or vegetation living in the area. If that happens, it can take away some of the habitats for smaller animal populations like rabbits or squirrels or snakes. So if you have too many grazing animals, too many cows, too many horses, too many goats, that are eating too much of the grass, that can destroy some of the smaller animal population, which would obviously lead to a decrease in native vegetation. That just means there's less plants growing there naturally, and even sometimes more accidents with vehicles. If you have way too many goats grazing on one particular field, sometimes they'll kind of wander out onto the roads and causing sometimes some serious accidents with cars that could be traveling nearby. Building of highways. This is kind of an obvious one, but when you build a highway, obviously you have to clear the land, causing removal of trees, which is the habitat for some animals, birds especially, squirrels, sometimes even monkeys or other small kind of animals that live in that area depending on where it is. And it can also force animals to move into other niches. If the squirrel's job was to eat the acorns that fell from the trees, well, if the trees are gone, it now no longer has the acorns to feed on. So it will have to occupy a new role or find somewhere else to live. And then lastly, the invasive species of plant can sometimes provide habitats for animals depending on the type of species that comes in, but this could be a bad scenario in the case of weeds or something that kind of got blown into an area and begins to grow very quickly and takes over. Sometimes it can choke out the water and nutrients for the other plants that are already there. But it also can provide habitats for animals that need somewhere to stay. Okay, these two pictures on the right side over here, you see kind of more green grasses in the background and things. This is what happens when you don't have enough, or when you have just kind of this is the good side, is what I'm trying to say. On this side, here's where you're seeing lots of dead grass, lots of not nearly as much green to be eaten over here. This is what happens when you have an overpopulation of grazers living in an area. It can just kind of thin out the foliage. Think of, rabbits, not moles, ferrets, maybe other types of kind of ground snakes or land animals. They have nowhere to live, nothing to feed on, nothing to build a home in. It can cause them to move out, but even just it destroys kind of the cropland here. It takes away a lot of the nutrients and causes a lot of problems there. So that's why farmers are constantly having to kind of move their herds around and allow for more grazing in different areas. Otherwise, they'll completely deplete or clean out all of the food resources in that area. And then down here, obviously, you can see this is the picture for building of highways. Okay, if you're doing your handwritten notes, this is the last part. Here's where we left off with the niches, and then you're going to write everything from here down. The oil spills, forest fires, overpopulation of grazers. These are all changes and their effects on ecosystems, building of highways, and invasive species. And all of those can have effects on the organisms living in that environment. Okay, we're not going to do the summary, but that is the last bit of the notes. Make sure if you got lost or stuck, make sure you go back and get those filled out, either the hand-printed version or the printed filled in version or the handwritten notes.